These can be classified on various different factors. Like on the basis of classification, on the basis of causative agent, we can classify them as infectious or non-infectious. An infectious disease is the one which is caused by a pathogenic microorganism. However, a disease which is caused by some other factors like genetic or environmental are called non-infectious diseases. Let's see both examples. You can see a blood smear of two different patients with two different diseases. This is the blood smear of a patient suffering from malaria. It affects the red blood cells, and the causative agent is a pathogenic microbe, that is Plasmodium. But in case B, this is a blood smear of a patient suffering from sickle cell anemia. Again, the affected cells are the red blood cells. But this disease is caused by genetics, not by a infectious microorganism. Diseases are often classified in terms of how they behave within a host or in a given population. A communicable disease is a disease in which an infected person can transmit it to another one. Examples are influenza, chickenpox, measles, and COVID-19. An extreme class of communicable diseases is called contagious diseases. Contagious diseases include diseases which are communicable and spread at a very high speed. So they are very high communicable or contagious. Both chickenpox and measles are contagious diseases. On the contrary, non-communicable diseases are those which are not transferred from one person to another person. An example is tetanus, which is caused by Clostridium tetani. It can only cause this infection when it enters the human body via abrasion or wound, and not from one person to another. Another useful way of defining the scope of a disease is in terms of its severity or duration. So, an acute infection is an infection which develops rapidly but lasts only a short time. An example is influenza. However, a chronic disease develops more slowly and the body reactions are less severe, but the disease is likely to last for a long period of time. An example is tuberculosis, a disease in which the symptoms are less pronounced than acute but more prolonged than the acute disease are called subacute diseases. So it's an intermediate between both acute and chronic disease. An example is subacute endocarditis, which is an inflammation of inner lining of heart caused by Streptococcus mutant. The last type of disease is called latent infection, in which the microbes remain in the body in an inactive form for a time but becomes active to produce symptoms of a disease. An example is cold sores. Infections can be classified according to the extent to which the host body is affected. They can be classified as local infection. Local infection is the one in which the invading microorganisms are limited to a relatively small area of the body. For example, abscesses or boils. Sometimes the agent of local infection can enter the blood or lymphatic vessels and spread to other specific parts of the body where they are confined to a specific area of body. This condition is called focal infection. These infection generally arises in teeth and gums. tonsils, or sinuses. Third type of infection is called systemic infection, in which a microorganism or its product are spread throughout the body by the blood or lymph. Measles is an excellent example of systemic infection. Septicemia, also called blood poisoning, is a systemic infection arising from multiplication of pathogens in the blood. Septicemia is a common example of sepsis. Bacteremia means the presence of bacteria in the blood. Viremia means the presence of virus in the blood. And toxemia refers to the presence of toxin in the blood, as in case of tetanus. The state of host resistance can also be used for classification of types of infection. There may be primary infection, which is an acute infection that is caused by initial illness. So that's the first microbes that cause an infection. Sometimes what happens after first infection, immune system becomes weak and a secondary microorganism can cause a disease. That infection is called secondary infection. Secondary infections are mostly caused by opportunistic pathogens. Secondary infection of skins and respiratory tracts are common and are sometimes more dangerous than the primary infections. Streptococcal bronchopneumonia following influenza is an example of secondary infection that is more serious than the primary infection. The third type of infection is called subclinic infection, also called inapparent infection. This is the one that doesn't cause any noticeable illness, like poliovirus and hepatitis A virus, can be carried by people who never develop the illness. It's time for our second checkpoint. So you have to answer three of these questions. First question is indicate in the following conditions what is the type of infection. In A, patient experiences an onset of malaise and symptoms last for 5 days. Patient B experiences cough and breathing difficulties for months. In case of patient C, has no symptoms and is a known carrier. Second question is, how can a local infection become systemic? What factors are involved? Just make a list. Third, write down any one disease or infection you had in the last month. To classify this disease infection on the basis of all different factors we have studied in this lecture. We will discuss the answers in our interactive section.